Greetings and welcome to this year's recorded annual training on the topic of intimate partner violence. The specific topic that I am focusing on for today's session is intimate partner violence, or IPV, and the role of faith, and how the connection between those two issues can contribute to or detract from one's health and well-being. My name is Marcy Witherspoon, and I am the Senior Training Specialist at the Health Federation of Philadelphia. I am a social worker by training and function as the Family Violence Specialist for the AHS Division of the Health Department. I spend much of my time working to integrate trauma-informed approaches into systems that serve others. During today's session, we will be discussing the role of faith as it pertains to IPV, the ways that religious or spiritual abuse can occur, the intersection between spiritual abuse and health and well-being, as well as what you need to know in your role of supporting patients who are experiencing this type of coercive control. I'd like to first start by asking you to do a momentary 10-second self-reflection on what you feel grateful for at the time that you are listening and watching to this recording, especially as we acknowledge the challenges that are occurring across the country today. Thank you. Hopefully you are now in a more focused, present, centered place and are ready to receive some additional information. We do know that no matter how challenging a situation can be, there is always something to be grateful for. And we also know that practicing gratitude leads to improved physical and psychological health, enhanced empathy for others, increased self-esteem, better sleep, improved relationships with others, and a host of other scientifically proven benefits. Now, what is spiritual abuse? It might be the first time you have even ever heard of such a thing. Well, it's defined as the use of scripture, traditions, and cultural norms that are used in order to assert power and control. In other words, it is abuse often administered under the guise of religion, and it can include harassment or humiliation and might be psychologically traumatic. So, what does faith have to do with IPV? Well, quite simply, faith can keep you in a relationship which is unhealthy because it frowns on divorce or separation. You know, the concept of till death do us part of many marriage vows. Faith might provide a partner with unrealistic expectations about their partner's ability to change. Certainly, we know people can change, but they have to want to change. Faith can be used by an abusive partner to manipulate and punish their partner. And faith can be the source of someone's belief system. They might support patriarchy, where men hold the power, misogyny, a dislike for or contempt of women, or heteronormativity, which is the concept that heterosexuality is the preferred or normal mode of sexual orientation, to the exclusion of any other kinds of intimate relationships where we know that IPV also exists. And sadly, in this day and age, some faith leaders are not aware of or familiar with the dynamics of intimate partner violence and can sometimes misguide and compromise a parishioner's safety and thus complicate their path forward. Quite frankly, faith has everything to do with it. Faith can play a major role in a survivor's journey to safety and healing. Faith leaders who are familiar with the dynamics of IPV can be huge sources of support and guidance. Some houses of worship have even served and continue to serve as safe havens or shelters for those in need. And the congregation, instead of shaming a victim or survivor or ostracizing them, can serve as their support network, typically when they may have been isolated by their abusive partner. Faith can also be the beacon of hope for people and provide a sense of purpose bigger than oneself. Faith can be life sustaining, and there certainly have been other times in our history when communities of faith were the only hope that individuals could hold on to. Let's take a look at this power and control wheel. It might be a little difficult to read this, but don't worry about that. I'm going to unpack it a bit for you, and we'll go through several spokes of this wheel. This iteration of the power and control wheel specifically refers to spiritual and religious abuse and was developed in 2014 by the Safe Havens Interfaith Partnership Against Domestic Violence in Boston. So I'm going to go through several spokes of the wheel and talk about how they impact patient care. First, you'll notice the spoke in the wheel that refers to the restricting access to and use of healthcare. I know we may not often think of this issue, especially when the focus is often the person in front of you. However, survivors of IPV may have to plan carefully when they can leave their homes and sometimes are prevented from leaving unless they are accompanied. This issue can prevent a survivor from accessing regular preventive care and treatment for themselves and for their children. It can also impact access to emergency treatment, family planning, or make it really difficult for a patient to adhere to a particular medication regimen, especially for those with a chronic condition. It is one of the reasons why women who are living with both HIV and IPV, which is approximately 55%, have poorer adherence to their antiretroviral treatment and typically poorer outcomes. The next spoke in the wheel that we'll talk about is that of controlling sexuality and or reproduction. In this area, the partner who is acting abusively might use scripture, cultural norms, and traditions to either force sex or deny sex, or force a partner to engage in sexual activities that are either painful or unwanted. It also might mean forcing or denying family planning, access, or use, which I have already alluded to. And this is a somewhat newer area, typically referred to as reproductive coercion, whereby a partner who is acting abusively uses power and control to interfere with a person's reproductive decision making and contraceptive behaviors. It might also involve forcing a partner to have genital mutilation, which is a practice used in some countries around the world, but which is illegal in the United States and has been since 1996. The reasons behind this practice vary. In some cases, it is seen as a rite of passage into womanhood, while others see it as a way to suppress a woman's desire and sexuality. The next spoke that I'd like to focus on is the one that explores the assertion of authority. Although this area specifically references gender roles and expectations and the reinforcement of male privilege, what we know is that anyone who is using scripture and cultural norms and traditions to maintain their power in the relationship is asserting their authority in an unhealthy manner, especially in that they require their partner to submit to them, or there would be consequences. In general, anyone living in this type of toxic atmosphere might have physical ramifications of this type of submission, which might show up in your patients as depression or anxiety, or could show up as migraines, high blood pressure, or unexplained chronic pain, or other assorted somatic complaints. The next spoke refers to the prolonging of abusive relationships. This area refers to the use of scripture and cultural norms and traditions to force a survivor to stay in an unhealthy relationship or to force forgiveness. Or it can be used to threaten the partner with death or the death of somebody they love. Or it can sometimes look like an abusive partner who says, "If you leave me, don't think you'll ever see your children again." This type of threat is likely to prevent many, if not most, survivors of IPV from leaving. That's why it is important for us to remain non judgmental. We may not know, and generally won't know, the full story. Also, a partner acting abusively might either minimize or totally deny the existence of the behavior and try to make the survivor feel like they are losing touch with reality. This is often called crazy making, and we know and understand how this could potentially impact a patient's physical and mental health. I'm going to focus just on this last spoke in the power and control wheel, and that is the use of isolation. Using scripture or cultural norms and traditions to separate or isolate a survivor from their faith community and support network, or frankly, anyone that would be considered part of somebody's protective factors or supportive network, creates a contrived situation whereby the abusive partner makes themselves the survivor's only source of help and support. This is a lonely place to be, especially when the help and support is limited or offered on a contingency basis. And nobody then believes the survivor because their story is never told. All information is offered from the abusive partner's perspective, from their lens. Silencing the partner through isolation oftentimes puts survivors in an untenable situation in which they are powerless. It is often why a trauma response to that type of situation might look like Stockholm syndrome, whereby somebody attaches to the person that's abusing them in order to survive. This might be very difficult to discern when you are seeing a patient at the health center. So let's now focus on what you can do if you if you discover that a patient is experiencing this type of situation in their home. First, we can universally screen all patients. We can provide universal education about healthy relationships. This is important for everybody, but it's especially important for young people who have not yet entered into relationships, so we can focus on prevention. Next, if patients do disclose abuse, believe and validate them by saying something like, "This is really common in relationships. You're not alone." Or, "You don't deserve this." Or, "I'm really sorry this is happening to you." Next, you can protect their confidentiality, as you are accustomed to doing with all patients, but especially since discussing this issue can potentially put their lives in danger. And then you can find out what the patient wants to do about their situation, and then help them to do that by providing support and resources for them to discuss options, both legal and otherwise, create safety plans, and the like. We should not be telling people what they should do. That is ultimately their decision to make. Our role is to help them make the safest choice possible and to provide them with the information they need in which to do so. Remember that we all can play a role in the eradication of IPV in our society. It just requires us to have a heart, to care. We can provide someone with a where to turn card, which lists a number of resources on it, or we can provide the Philadelphia DV hotline number, which now has a chat function as well. We can refer them to the My Plan phone app, which allows for support without ever having to leave one's home, and which can curate a plan based on one's individual circumstances. Let's do this together. We all deserve to live in a world which is free from violence. As always, I thank you for your time and attention, and please feel free to reach out to me with any questions or concerns. Thank you.